Dowerhands have forged an alliance with the Blue Crag Goblins and have laid siege to Gondamon for nearly 2 weeks. The final assault will soon be launched.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Pineleaf Responds, where today I'll respond to Anding's question of how I would rate the 5 current expansions to The Lord of the Rings Online. This is made before the release of the Mordor expansion. We don't know yet what exactly is going to be in the Mordor expansion, so this is how I would rate the 5 expansions prior to the Mordor expansion. Now, I should note that in my ratings here I'm going to be a little different than Anding. Anding based his ratings based on how he felt the current expansion, as you buy it in the LOTRO store, exists. I am basing it more on how it was when the expansion was released, or more precisely, how it was after the first update following it, because let's face it, usually they make 1 or 2 tweaks after the first update, so we'll give him 1 update after that. But on the most part, it's the state of it at the time of release, and any major changes since then are not being taken into account. So now let's go to number 5, and number 5 is quite the same as Anding's, Helm's Deep. Helm's Deep to me is by far my least favorite of the expansions. Now, I know this is a great battle that's of major consequence, the ending of Volume 3 and all that, but yeah, epic battles. It comes down to epic battles. I do not like epic battles, and that should be absolutely no surprise to anyone. I don't like how they operate. I just find them annoying. I find them tedious. I feel like you are insignificant in there, and that whatever happens in there, it really don't feel like you're doing anything to the battle. The ideas they had later on in places like in Pelennor, I think, worked a lot better. They wanted us to feel like we were in great battles that were larger than we were, and they were certainly successful in putting us into that. But then there's absolutely no incentive for me to do it, because I care more about what the instance is by itself. I don't care 2 bits about the rewards they provide. If they provide you extra big rewards or anything like that, I don't care. So therefore, yes, even though the best rewards were in the epic battles, I just completely ignored those things because I just did not like doing them. I might do them once for the epic storyline, and even that was under duress. Some characters, oh, let's just skip it if I don't need to do them. Now, of course, a consequence of the epic battle system was that since the epic battles were the cornerstone new system of that expansion, that meant that there was a paywall for the epic storyline, because the epic storyline required the epic battles, and the epic battles required that you pay, so therefore you were required to buy the expansion to experience the end of Volume 3. You went through all this time working through Volume 3, working through the story, getting the feel for the story, feeling for these people in there, and you can't experience the end of the story unless you buy the expansion. So yeah, I didn't appreciate that too much. So I realize that's a item that if you bought the expansion, you wouldn't have to worry about it, but yeah, I just didn't sit too well in that matter. I know it was sort of forced on there, but I wish there was another way of them handling it, somehow making the epic battles an optional part of the storyline so that it could be bypassed. And as for class changes, I'm pretty much neutral on that. So I'm not as big as complaining about those as some other people are. But yeah, I know a lot of people don't like that, and some people would even rate Helm's Deep lower than I do, even though I'm ranking it at the bottom of the 5. Now, there is one thing though that did bug me in the Epic storyline in the interfacing with the landscape quests, and that is when you're in the Broadacres in the Epic, where you get sent along and you're expected to continue along, go to the Stone Deans, before finishing up the Broadacres for the landscape quest, because if you don't, you foul up the Epic storyline. Oh, I wish they had found some solution that would allow you to be able to survive whichever choice you made. I think there could have been one or two things that could have been done in order to have allowed you to advance without having to run into that little complication there. So what is number 4 then? That would be the Riders of Rohan. And of course, in this case, we're talking about the other new system that was introduced in Rohan, mounted combat. Let's face it, you hear Rohan, the first thing everybody was saying, asking and all, and begging for in going into Rohan was, will we get mounted combat into it? Turbine worked really hard to find a way to get mounted combat in there, because it's very difficult to do it in the type of game that you have here in LOTRO. And I think they did, with the engine they had, probably did as good a job as they could reasonably have done. Unfortunately, as good a job as you could reasonably have done is overall not a thrilling thing to do, because let's face it, in MMOs you try to have packed landscapes so that you have plenty of miles for people to kill. In mounted combat, you want to have people be able to go over wide, large distances, and those two needs conflict with each other. If you ever try to do mounted combat, you are constantly gathering many more enemies than you could possibly handle at a time. And that tends to be a bit of an annoyance in there, and I tend to avoid mounted combat as much as possible. And with some classes, I have a lot of trouble getting into doing the mounted combat, especially with melee classes. So that doesn't mean I necessarily enjoy mounted combat in ranged combat. For example, recently I was going in Wildemore, and did I do mounted combat there? Of course not. I'm fighting against mounted combats on the ground, just shooting my bow at them, because I'd rather do it on foot. So yeah, I don't enjoy mounted combat, and the war steeds, I don't know if it's most people, but like many people, my main thing to do with war steeds is to get around from place to place faster. And in fact, even with that, half the time I just bring out my conventional steed to go from many places if I'm not in the mood to go through the fiddly nature of war steeds. So therefore, yes, I place Riders of Rohan at number 4. Now at number 3, we have the Treason of Isengard, and this one is more of a meh thing than anything else. In here we have no new system was added. Now I'll consider that to be a neutral thing. At the time I was thinking that was a big negative, but considering how mounted combat turned out and how epic battles turned out, well, maybe that's not as bad as a thing as I thought at the time. But there was no real new system there. Now, what was wonderful, though, were the cosmetic changes done to the game. Lots of wonderful cosmetics were introduced there. and more variability in the enemies. So yes, we did have some nice things added, but as I said, no new shinies added either. Now the other thing that concerns me there was the strange interaction between the epic storyline and the landscape, where you go around to a place in the epic storyline, you go from one place to the other, and then they say, alright, when you're finished helping everyone, please go on. When you finish helping everyone there, meaning with the landscape quest, please go on to the next area. Really, that really makes for thrilling storytelling. And yeah, back in the time, I think that when they wrote the first drafts of the epic storyline there, they thought that the epic storyline was still going to be paid. But the free nature of the epic storyline was not taken into account then when they created that particular one. So it looked also rather out of joint on the way that they did it. So yes, a little bit of a problem on that matter. So therefore, I have nothing really drawing me towards the Treason of Isengard. Now number 2 is Moria. The Mines of Moria. Now I know a lot of people there like to put that as their number 1. And my favorite thing, of course, in it, you could guess from what I'm doing right now, is I am on a Warden. So yes, my favorite class is from the Mines of Moria expansion. So that's a big plus for Moria. Now the big neutral for it has to be the legendary item system, where you have this weapon which you thought that this is a big legendary item, this is what's going to help us against the Watcher, this is going to help us get into Moria. 3 levels later, okay, I'll toss it for another one. And in fact, they even poke fun of that at the end of Volume 2, where they poke fun of what you wind up having to do when you eventually get to you. Is you're going around deconstructing and all that fine stuff. Now, you can finally at level 100 go around and viewing items and the like, so that helps in the matter on that. But, yeah, legendary items is at best an meh thing. Now, Anding loves it because he thinks of it as the largest dungeon ever created. I don't know, to me, Moria is not a dungeon. To me, Moria is more of an indoor landscape area. Now, it's a very large indoor area, you're right, and I feel it's more of a landscape area than it is a dungeon. But that's just a matter of personal opinion on my way. Now, one of the items in there is the original nature of the epic storyline, especially Book 5. Now remember, I'm basing this on the original version as the area was released as an expansion. And the original version of Book 5 had this instance, a set of 3 consecutive instances, the Drums of the Deep, where you had to tediously go around 6 player instances, and no one really liked them. You only would do them for the epic storyline, so getting a group to help you with it, yeah, it was really bad. I went through it exactly once, and I think it was with my kinship, where kinship got together so that we could do this, because there was no other way I would ever finish the epic storyline in Moria if it weren't for that. So yes, I did not like that at all, and in fact, I wasn't too keen of the endgame in Moria at either. And after I got up to full level and all that stuff, that's a point where I actually dropped the game for 6 months, because I thought, let's see what I can do while I wait for the next expansion to come out. And that's something that I did not do at any other point while I was playing in LOTRO. So therefore, if I was going to actually drop the games, obviously I can't consider Mines of Moria to be my favorite expansion in there. Now, in case you want to know what happened to Drums of the Deep eventually, those 3 instances were turned into 3 skirmishes. And so those are the 3 Moria skirmishes now. And that leads us then into my number 1, of course, Siege of Mirkwood. You notice, what am I doing in playing while I am answering these questions? I am doing skirmishes. Now, Siege of Gondomar was always a free skirmish, I believe. I think Tuckborough and Gondomar were always free as sort of a sampler, and that the rest of them you had to buy Mirkwood. Remember, this is back before they made the Epic storyline free. So because of that paradigm, I'm not dinging it for not having a free Epic storyline, because that was not the expectation back then. So therefore, you had this huge amount of instance combat that was scalable. You could do it the way you want, and you know how much I like skirmishes. That's a running joke in LOTRO Players News, and how much I've done them. Skirmisher alert on all of the characters. So yes, that alone is enough to make it number 1 when compared to all the others. Now, I know that Andy complained about the fact that he says it's not even an expansion anymore, because the skirmishes now are all now sold piecemeal, and it's a relatively small landscape area. Yes, it was sold as a small expansion. And yes, that's what it was. It delivered what it promised. And therefore, I'm not going to complain about its size because of that, because I think that was exactly what was the expectation for it then. And what I do like, though, as I said, the skirmishes. My favorite system that was introduced within an expansion. So those are my ratings for the 5 expansions. Number 5, Helm's Deep, because of the epic battle system, which I do not like. I don't even like the more recent epic battles that some people say are a lot better than the original ones. I don't even like those. Riders Rohan, because I think mounted combat just gets me into more trouble than anything else than it's worth, so I tend to avoid it whenever possible. Treason of Isengard, because I just feel it's meh. I could... Yes, it has some nice cosmetics, but the strange relation between the epic storyline and the landscape doesn't excite me all that much. Mines of Moria, we've got the Warden class in there, which really helps it quite a bit, but the original version of Book 5 within Moria, I just don't like it. And then the fact that, of course, that I had even stopped playing for a while when Moria was the active, most recent expansion in there. And of course, number 1, Siege of Mirkwood, because that is where we introduced the skirmish system, and therefore that is my list of my 5 expansions. Now, how would I rate Mordor in this? Obviously, Mordor's not out yet. I will hope that it doesn't continue the trend that we unfortunately see in this, where the later the expansion is, the lower I'm ranking it. I hope it reverses the trend and that we could return to a really nice expansion. What's it going to be like? I don't know, but I'm looking forward to see it, and I'm hoping that it's a good one. But that is it for today's answer, and this is Pineleaf Needles reminding you to skirmish responsibly.